This is Patrick from WSOU 89.5 FM, the loudest rock in Jersey, and I'm here with Scott Ian from Anthrax. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. So let's go back to the very beginning. 1981, you and Dan Loker joined forces to make this band. You two met at school, right?
Yeah, we went to high school together.
And that's also where you came up with the name Anthrax, right? In the bio textbook?
He learned about it in class, yeah. And then one day walking home from school, I remember him talking about this thing called anthrax that he learned about. And it was this like deadly spore. And I remember saying to him something to the effect of, "Oh, that sounds like it would make a good metal band name. When your band White Heat breaks up, me and you will start a band called Anthrax." And he said, "White Heat's not breaking up," but 6 months later.
Yeah. So once you had a full lineup for this band called Anthrax with Greg D'Angelo, Greg Walls, and Neil Turbin, who would sing on Fistful of Metal, what were you guys doing early on to create that Anthrax thrash sound we know today?
I wouldn't say that was the lineup that created the Anthrax thrash sound. That wasn't the actual original lineup from
right.
the first time we jammed. There was a lot of people in like 81. At one point, my younger brother was actually singing for us in like early 82. We had John Connolly from Nuclear Assault, was actually the first singer of Anthrax because he was another high school friend. Yeah, I wouldn't say that was the lineup. I would say it was when Charlie joined the band, because then we had a drummer that was able to play at the speeds we wanted to play at, was able to play double bass drumming like we wanted. And Charlie was into all the same music that Danny and I, were into. So it was once Charlie joined, that's when it really, I think, really started to happen, because even some of the songs that we had at that time suddenly took on a new life and a new energy. Charlie just was a real kick to everything we had been doing. And then from that point, everything we started writing and working on, like stuff that ended up on Fistful of Metal. I would definitely say it was from that point when Charlie joined. And then, of course, Danny Spitz not long after.
Right. And during this time, you were also playing shows in New York and New Jersey with another up-and-coming act called Metallica. Describe this scene early on. What was the energy like in this scene when thrash was still an underground thing?
It was just exciting to get to meet a bunch of guys from, across the country who were into all the same music. We had a very small scene, a very small group of people that we were friends with, most of which, who were part of like what became known as the Old Bridge Militia. Because we used to have to go down to Old Bridge, New Jersey, to find anyone that even like knew about new wave of British heavy metal bands and a lot of the underground metal scene. We would go hang out at Johnny Z's record store, Rock and Roll Heaven, and we would go to house parties down there in Old Bridge and Sayreville, and that's where it seemed to be happening. That was like the epicenter of the metal that we loved. And so when Metallica, we find out about this band Metallica, Johnny Z played me the No Life to Leather demo at the store one day, and then he said, "I'm bringing them to New York. I'm going to make an album." And I'm like, "How are you going to do that?" And he's like, "I have no idea, but we're going to do it." And I was like, "Well, how do we get in on that?" He's like, "You're 6 months behind," and he always had a really good answer to every question. But yeah, and then, Metallica shows up and we were just instantly friends. I mean, people know the story. They were staying at the music building in Jamaica, Queens, where we had a rehearsal room, which was basically a burnt out building that would have had homeless people squatting in it. Except someone had the smart idea, like, well, I can rent these rooms out to bands and they'll actually pay. So Johnny Z had rented them a room in this building, and that's where they were sleeping and eating and rehearsing. And so, they were showering at our houses and whatnot. So yeah, we were friends right away. It was just great to meet people from what seemed to be so far away at that time that were into the same bands. It was just great.
Yeah, and Johnny Z, like you said, he was the one. He founded Megaforce and released Kill 'Em All. He said you guys were 6 months behind, but Kill 'Em All is released. Suddenly, this underground scene is gaining nationwide attention. So he signs you guys. You record your first label single, "Soldiers of Metal," which was produced by Ross the Boss, and you had already recorded demos early on. But what was it like going from playing house parties and these underground bars and clubs to recording a single for a label with Ross from Manowar?
I mean, it was amazing. You know, Johnny's tenacity and his ability to take the wildest ideas and actually make it happen, and and put his money where his mouth was. I mean, Johnny, it's not like Johnny was some rich guy with unlimited funds that could just start a record label. He just had a way of making things happen, and getting people who were as into the music as he was to be a part of it. He had friends who like, I know this guy who's a good artist. He could help with album covers, or you know, he basically put together a crew like Maria Ferrero. He's like, you're going to be the publicist. You're good at talking to people, and I mean, Maria's had a career as a publicist now in the music business since like 1984. Because Johnny was like, you're going to be the publicist, and it was just an incredible time. And so the fact that we were with this guy, he decides, I'm starting my label. Nobody wants to sign Metallica. Nobody wants to sign Anthrax. Nobody wants to sign Raven. I'm going to do my own label. I'm starting Megaforce Records. I'm going to put the albums out. I'll figure out how to get distribution. He did all of that. It's mind blowing from nothing. Never having worked in the record industry or anything, just because he loved the music. And he felt that there were people all around the world that would feel the same way about Metallica and Anthrax as he did. And I mean, he couldn't have been more right. You know what I mean? What seemed like such a pipe dream was 100% not a pipe dream. And so, yeah, when all of a sudden he's like, all right, I'm ready. We're going to get moving with you guys. Metallica is starting to roll now. Let's go record a single to like kind of introduce you to the world outside of New York and New Jersey. And yeah, he said, let's, because we had that demo. We had the demo that got us signed to Megaforce had the one song that Charlie played on was Soldiers of Metal. So we took that basically became that 7-inch that came out. The first thing we released on Megaforce, which was like in the fall of '83, I believe. I think there was like 1,000 of them, and they sold out immediately. And and Ross was like a hero of ours from the Dictators and from Manowar early on. And so getting to work with him was awesome. He took me to buy my first Marshall amps because he had a Marshall endorsement, and I was able to get them for his discounted price because I couldn't afford them otherwise. And then right after that single came out, we went up to upstate New York and recorded Fistful of Metal. Spent 3 weeks in Ithaca recording that album, and it came out in January '84. And we've never stopped ever since.
Of course. So you record and release Fistful of Metal, but right after that album, the band went through some lineup changes. Frank Bello replaced Dan. Joey Belladonna didn't fill in right away. It was Matt Fallon before Joey. But what was this period like when two key members of the band left right after you're on this high, you're signed, and you release your debut album?
Well, when we went out on tour that summer, well, actually, sorry, I need to go back. The thing with Danny Looker was, into my mind, was not something that ever was supposed to happen. That was something that at the time Neil took it upon himself to make that decision unilaterally. And then basically like, holding a gun to the band's head, either him or me. And we had this tour booked in the summer of '84 with Raven. And we were just in an impossible situation. And that's what happened in that moment when, Neil basically said, it's either him or me. And we had to make that decision that, well, how are we going to find a singer? But then we're stuck with this guy who we hate. So it was just terrible. It was like instantly, it's like learning lessons that 20-year-olds have no capability emotionally to learn at that age in what they call the music business. We were just a bunch of kids who loved to bang our heads and play thrash metal, and suddenly like it becomes a business. And how we knew nothing, none of us knew anything about that. And so we talked to Johnny Z, and you have to make a decision that is going to impact the rest of your life. And that was the decision that was made in that moment. And so Frankie, who was a part of our tight circle of friends and actually, helped us out at gigs. He would help us load gear in and out of places. And he's Charlie's nephew and he plays bass. Well, we should just ask Frankie to do it because he's already our friend. We don't have to go find somebody. And then we went on tour that summer in '84 and very quickly understood that there was no way we would ever move past 1984 if we didn't make a vocal change, because we had a lot of personal issues with Neil and we had professional issues with Neil. We had just had issues with Neil, and the band never would have moved forward if we didn't make that change. That would have been the end of the band. So we got home. The last show of that tour in '84 was that what they now call a legendary night at Roseland. I want to say it was like August 2nd or something like that, because like the anniversary just passed. And it was Raven, Metallica, Anthrax, and we sold it out, which for 3 bands on an indie label was pretty impressive. And every major label had their A&R people down at that show, and all 3 bands signed their major deals not long after that. Metallica going to Elektra, we signed to Island, and Raven went to Atlantic. We were all under the Warner Elektra Atlantic umbrella, and and then we were all off and running even more after that. Of course, we didn't have a singer because right after Roseland, we told Neil he was out of the band, and we needed to find somebody to move forward. For about 5 seconds, we entertained the idea of being like Kiss, where Frankie would be Paul and I would be Gene, because Frankie could sing and I had a rougher voice, kind of like Gene, even though Gene can sing great. And we would just do it like that as a 4-piece. But I'm very happy we didn't make that decision. And so we were on the hunt for a singer. We had written a lot of Spreading the Disease was pretty much written by that point, and we were ready to go make the record. Of course, we just needed the missing piece, which was a vocalist.
Right. And so you got the songs for Spreading the Disease. You need a vocalist. So you audition Joey, who is not a thrash fan when he first came to audition. What do you think about having this guy audition who has no experience with thrash and is more of a rock cover band kind of guy?
That was, I think, the biggest attraction for us, because we wanted a singer. Anthrax was very much in the vein of Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, any band Ronnie James Dio fronted. We wanted a guy like that. That was always the vision of Anthrax. As much as I love Lemmy and Tom Araya and James Hetfield and so on and so on, that wasn't the sound that I ever heard in my head as the sound of Anthrax with that type of vocal. We wanted a Bruce, we wanted a Ronnie, we wanted a Rob, you know what I mean? And we found that in Joey. I loved that he didn't know who we were. When he showed up at the studio in Ithaca, I asked him, did you hear our first album or anything? He's like, no, I didn't know anything about you until I talked to Johnny Z on the phone. And, he sent me the record, and I think he sent him like a cassette or something to listen to. And he knew nothing about it. Joey was much more, like you said, hard rock, mainstream rock music. He obviously knew Maiden and Priest, and he was a very big Ronnie fan. He loved Ronnie. Very much in the Ronnie solo career with Sabbath, with Rainbow, whoever. He loved Ronnie James Dio. So we knew, he had the right, what do you call it? Not upbringing, but
Background.
He had really good taste. Yeah, he had great taste in singers. We were on the same page when it came to that. And we went in the studio and we asked him to just go on the mic and maybe just sing some stuff a cappella, just so we could hear his pedigree was the word I was looking for. Anyway, he got on the mic and he just started singing. And if I'm not mistaken, it might have been some Journey stuff. And everyone in the control room was like, holy crap, listen to that voice. And I remember Carl Kennedy, who was the producer on Spreading and Fistful, but he looked at us and he was like, that's the guy that's gonna, like, that separates you from everybody. That puts you over the top right there. Listen to that voice. Like, that's like Lou Gramm from Foreigner. You know what I mean? Like, we found this guy with the golden throat. And so, like, what are you doing? You want to hang out for a few days? You want to, like, jam? And he's like, yeah, sure. And that was it. We just started working on songs together, our stuff. And soon enough, he was in there singing it.
Right. So you hire Joey and you start recording Spreading the Disease, which has all these crazy hits for Anthrax, like AIR, Madhouse, Medusa, Armed and Dangerous. Loudwire called AIR the thrashiest song on the album. You said some of these songs even foreshadowed what you would do on Among the Living. Why do you think Spreading the Disease was such a turning point for the band as a sophomore record?
Well, because it was the first record we wrote with that, like, basically the band intact. Fistful of Metal is an album that, was written over a span of 3 years, from 81 until we recorded it, like 2.5 years, from like the inception of the band till the fall of 83 when we actually went in the studio. And you could just see the difference in the material from like BC before Charlie and AC after Charlie. Because once Charlie was involved, and not even so much as a writer yet on Fistful, but just his playing, it elevated us. And then he starts writing riffs too. And so you just hear that on Spreading. You had me, Charlie, Frankie, and even leftover stuff from Lilker on Spreading the Disease, riffs that Danny had going forward. Like, I think he had some riffs that were in Gung Ho maybe. And I can't remember. The credits are on the record anyway. But it was the first time we wrote as a band, as a unit, with Charlie as our drummer. And I just think we just grew, we got better at songwriting. We had one album under our belts. We knew what we were doing a little bit more than we did previously. And we were just better. We went on tour. We went all over the country that summer of 84 and had that experience. And it was just, and now we've got this singer that we like personally, and we felt could do anything. We could write anything and he's going to be able to sing it. There were no more restrictions on anything in the band. It went from being a dictatorship to a democracy very quickly. And it just definitely freed our minds as far as guys trying to write music. And I think that's why Spreading is such a leap forward. And yeah, AIR was the last song. We had basically recorded the album. We thought we were done. Joey was still working on vocals, and Charlie was already back in the city at home. And then he said, hey, I've got this idea. I've got these riffs, and I need to come back up so we could like work on this song. It has to be on the album. It has to be on the album. Like, okay. And we hadn't broken down any of the gears. Drum kit was still set up. And so he came back up to Ithaca, and we arranged AIR. We put it together and recorded that. And everybody felt the same way. We're like, oh my God, could you imagine if we didn't have this song? It would be a different record. It just makes such a statement opening the record. And being that it was the last song written, you could see that's, looking back on it, we didn't know then. But of course, looking back on it, you're able to see, oh, okay, that's where we're going now. That's what's going to happen next. That's just the tip of the iceberg for where we're going. And we recorded that song, and we knew the record was done.
Right. So you've got this album, Spreading the Disease, which is rocking the world of thrash and metal. And during this time, you're also touring with Wasp and Black Sabbath, playing these arena type venues. What's going through your head during this time? In only a few years, you went from a sort of underground house party band to a real force to be reckoned with. Is it pressure, or were you riding a crazy wave? What was going on?
It was, I wouldn't say pressure because, you know, I never felt it that way. I never felt it like pressure. I felt it more like just wanting to work. You know, we were we were always we were always just what's next, what's next, what's next. Like how do we get to tour with a bigger band? How do you do this? How do you do that? You're learning. I mean, we're out playing clubs and stuff, of course, on our own anywhere we can. But yeah, like how do you get to go out with Iron Maiden? How do you get to go out with Judas Priest? And then suddenly Metallica gets the Ozzy tour, in '86, and it's like Metallica is going to open for Ozzy in arenas all across the states. Like, how do they get to do that? Well, how do we do that? And Johnny Z, you're 6 months behind. But yeah, in '86, the beginning of that spreading the disease tour, we found out, at some point in early '86, hey, you're going to get to open for Black Sabbath and Wasp on this arena run. And we're like, holy cow, that's amazing. Uh, it was, on paper, it looked great. It wasn't the Sabbath that people think of when they think of Black Sabbath. It was, I dare say, kind of a low point for Black Sabbath. And the shows did not do very well. We played Brendan Byrne Arena. I think that was probably the best attended of the 5 shows we did, which was supposed to be like a 5-week tour, but it got canceled pretty quickly. And Brendan Byrne, I think, maybe there was 5,000-6,000 people there. We probably played to 3,000 people, which for us was great. We're still, hey, we're in the arena. There's people here watching us. They're cheering. So we always just took it as a positive. And then we were able to, when that tour just kind of ended a lot earlier than it was supposed to, and we jumped right back out on a club headlining tour for like 6-7 weeks all around the States. And that was our first time really, and we went to Europe for the first time. We did we did London for the first time. So many firsts. We went to Japan in '86. That the spreading record really just opened the doors for everything. All that stuff started happening. Now we were wondering, how do you do this? How do you do that? Well, you get an agent, and he calls the promoter in Japan and says, "Do you want to book Anthrax?" And hopefully they say yes. And that happened, And so it was never pressure. I would say it was more just total excitement, just constantly being excited about what was happening, and the fact that we were being allowed to work. We were being allowed to be a band because there was a demand around the planet already. People all around the planet were connecting to our music, and they wanted to see it. And that's the most exciting thing in the world. Think like, wow, there's kids in Germany that want to see our band. There's kids in Australia. It was mind blowing,
Yeah, definitely. So it comes time to make your third album, Among the Living. Some of the first songs for this album were written still on the road. How do you think being a touring musician on the road as a metal band impacted your songwriting and sound at that point, if at all?
Well, the whole what's the best way to put it? The kind of innocence of newness quickly goes away once you're out there grinding it out on tour. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but you learn. You learn how to be a band. You learn what it takes. You learn how hard it is and how hard you have to work constantly to maintain what you're doing. Because there's no phoning it in. There's no calling in sick. Like, we quickly realized that, certainly in '87, because there was like no time off. We finished doing dates for Spreading the Disease in like early '87, and we made Among the Living, and we were right back out like in May of '87 on tour, and then on tour the whole year till the end of '87, where we went from playing clubs to suddenly being able to sell 7,000-8,000 tickets everywhere we went. And it never stopped. At that point, we hadn't like literally hadn't had time off in like 2 years or something, 2.5 years. And it was just work, 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 work. And it's all we wanted to do was work, work, work. I didn't want to be home. I would get home to New York. I'd get to my little apartment in Queens and I'd be like, I don't want to be here. When are we leaving? It's just all I wanted to do was be on tour. There was nothing better than stepping on a tour bus. So for us, it was a dream come true. So all the hard work, everything, especially for me, it's all I ever wanted to do. And I had no expectation that it ever would be easy. So for me, I couldn't have been happier with how things were going and where things were going and learning how to be a band. And then to answer your question, I guess, after that long-winded answer, learning how to be a band definitely helped us with our songwriting because we were able to draw on all the experiences we were having as humans that we didn't have just a couple of years before that. Our lives had completely changed in a very short amount of time. And all of that went into Among the Living. So much of that, the energy of it, the excitement of where we were at as these guys that are now in this like working band, it's all over that record. It's in the speed and the energy of that record 100%.
Right. And something that's also interesting about Among the Living is it was co-produced by Eddie Kramer, who engineered for Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. What was it like making a thrash album with a guy like that helping take the lead?
He was really able to capture what we sounded like in the room, what we sounded like to ourselves when we were rehearsing. He was able to capture that. That's why we wanted to work with Eddie. We felt like his studio records always sounded really what a band sounded like, stripped down, no BS, just like that's the band in a room playing their songs. And that's when we would be in our rehearsal room working on stuff that, we wanted to capture that so people could feel that same thing we felt when we were in this small little room and everything's super loud and it's just raging and exciting and we're bouncing off the walls. And that's what we wanted on that record. And we definitely captured it with Eddie.
You were on tour. What has it been like to share this experience with your fans and bring them the metal they've known for 40 years?
It's been a great tour. And just to go back to just kind of tie up the Among the Living thing, it's safe to say that record and then all the touring we did on the back of it, it left such a mark on the world for us that record basically enabled us to have a career. That album gave us our career. It enabled us to call our own shots and do what we wanted to do and not have anybody get into our business and try and tell us what kind of band to be or how to write our songs or any of that crap that bands go through. Among the Living, it opened the door to a world where we just got to be Anthrax and everybody just left us alone. And that's a great place to be when you're in a band. And that's why we're sitting here talking about a 40th anniversary tour, even though we're actually technically 41 now. But it's been amazing. The tour's been great. The package is great. I think the dynamics in the show between Hatebreed, Black Label, and Anthrax, even though we're all branches on the same tree, we're all so distinctly different. Hatebreed just kicks it off so well, just so much energy. I mean, if you've never seen Hatebreed live before, you're in for such a treat. They're so brutal and fun at the same time. And Jamie is just one of the best in the business as a front man. And then Zach comes on and just crushes, totally different vibe than Hatebreed, just crushingly heavy. And then we come on and it's like a combination of all of that. It's metal, it's hardcore, it's thrash, it's Sabbathy, it's everything. I see it every night, how the crowd reacts to all three bands. And I think it's a really great dynamic package. And people have been coming out. The shows have been awesome. So we really can't ask for more.
Scott, thank you so much for doing this. This is Patrick with WSOU 89.5.
Cool. Cheers, man. Thank you.
You got it.
Right on.